Have you heard of the missing plane? You probably have. There are a few planes that get out there and never come back. We can usually attribute those cases to foul play or human error. But this case is different. The plane was a Boeing 757, the same make and model that you and I would take in a heartbeat if it was going somewhere sunny. It wasn't just any ordinary flight either. This was Malaysia Airlines flight MH370, and this is what really happened to it. On March 8th, 2014, the world looked up into the sky and watched as a piece of metal turned into a shooting star. That metal had once been a part of something magnificent. It was an airplane called MH370. Now it was hurtling toward the ocean floor, somewhere over the Indian Ocean. Its final moments were captured by military radar, but no one knew where it had come from or why it was crashing. And today, we still don't know. The story of this plane took off the day before its demise. On March 2014, the pilot of MH370, Captain Zaharia Ahmad Shah, was hanging around the Kuala Lumpur International Airport. He and his co-pilot, First Officer Farik Abdul Rahim, were supposed to be getting ready for their next flight. Instead, they were goofing off like teenagers who didn't have a care in the world. Their next flight was going to be from Beijing to Kuala Lumpur. They had already completed the first leg and were just killing time before they got to fly again. While they were there, a police officer walked past them and said hello. Little did he know that he might be saying goodbye without even realizing it. At 12:21 a.m., the two men checked in and signed some papers. As always, there was a lot of paperwork involved. They signed for their passengers, which included 227 people from 15 countries and an additional 12 crew members. Some of the notable passengers included 2 infants, an Olympic badminton champion, and one very famous man, Jiang Kaesong, aka Jacko, the founder of InSing, an adult video website. After signing the papers, the pilots went through a couple of unimportant briefings and then made their way to the plane. As they approached, a supervisor asked the captain if he wanted anything. The captain said no, but his first officer did. He wanted some water. The supervisor obliged and gave the man some water. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. At 1:19 a.m., the plane pushed back from the gate and taxied to the runway. Someone on the ground waved goodbye to the plane as it got ready to depart. Those were the last goodbyes anyone ever got to say to the passengers and crew. At 1:53 a.m., MH370 took off, and as it disappeared into the night sky, someone said, "Subhanallah, that's God's will." How could they know that was the case when no one else did? As the plane climbed into the night sky, it was met with turbulence. The air traffic controllers radioed this to the pilots so they could adjust their course. By 2 a.m., the plane was flying over the South China Sea, and the pilots had leveled off at 35,000 feet. It was going to cruise at that altitude for the foreseeable future. On the ground, the staff of Malaysia Airlines were saying their prayers. One of them was a Muslim chaplain. He prayed for the safety of the passengers and the crew. He would pray for them every day for the rest of his life. But none of his prayers were ever answered. At 2:19 a.m., MH370 was doing what it was designed to do. It was slicing through the skies with ease. Its destination was in sight. But what happened next was not in the flight plan. When the plane reached its cruising altitude, the pilots turned off the systems that helped them navigate. At this point, they were experts flying a plane with the same route memorized in their heads. When they turned off the autopilot, a new blip appeared on the screen. a blip that didn't look like the plane they were tracking. To see what was going on, the controller checked another screen, and sure enough, MH370 was exactly where it should be. The second blip was a mistake. They dismissed it and got back to work. Meanwhile, the passengers were sleeping soundly in their seats. Most of them were heading home after a vacation in China. Some of them were heading to their next vacation spot. No one on board had any idea they wouldn't be making it to their destinations. No one on the ground had any idea either. Over the next hour, the pilots performed some standard procedures and then cut off contact with the outside world. They turned off their transponder, and the communication with the outside world came to an end. The only people who knew anything about this were the pilots. They had done something they weren't supposed to do. For the next few hours, the plane flew under the radar. In fact, it flew right over the Indian coast, and the military radar picked it up. But no one knew what to do with the information. It was a ghost plane with no passengers, crew or pilots sending out distress signals. It was a plane with no explanation. The first clue we got as to where the plane was headed came when military radar data showed us that the plane had turned around and was heading back to Beijing. Was it a medical emergency? Had there been a bomb on board? These thoughts raced through the minds of the investigators, but none of them were correct. The plane was now being tracked by both primary and secondary radar. The controller tried to reach the pilots, but there was no response. Usually, at this stage of the flight, they would be chatting with the controller and planning their approach. Now all they got was static. By 7:15 a.m., MH370 had dropped down from 35,000 feet to 10,000 feet. The pilots had done something serious. At this point, they would need to land the plane. If they couldn't, they would be putting everyone on board in danger. Now, the controller finally got a hold of the plane. The co-pilot picked up the radio and said, "Good morning, Beijing." That was the last time anyone heard his voice. From that moment onwards, silence filled the airwaves. By 7:22 a.m., the plane was off the radar. The controller tried to raise the plane again, but there was no reply. The passengers and crew were doomed. Their final moments were spent in the sky, not knowing what was about to happen. At 7:24 a.m., MH370 made one final transmission. It was a whisper in the wind. It was a whisper that would lead nowhere. The plane was now flying like a phantom over the Indian Ocean. A search party was put together, but no trace of the plane was found. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. The investigation dragged on and on, but no one could find the plane. Today, it still hasn't been found. Here's what makes the disappearance of MH370 so strange. Planes don't just disappear from the face of the earth. Sure, small planes do, but commercial planes with experienced crews and decent weather don't just vanish. In fact, MH370 wasn't your average plane. It had flown that route hundreds of times before. The pilots had flown that route many times before. Everyone on board had done everything they were supposed to do, or so it seemed. So here's what we think happened to MH370. Before the plane even left the ground, the pilots had decided to ignore protocol. They turned off the transponder and disabled the communication systems. Why would they do such a thing? We may never know. What we do know is that at some point during the flight, the pilots changed the flight plan and decided to head for the Indian Ocean. They then flew over the ocean and crashed. But why would they do that? We don't know. It has been suggested that the pilots intentionally crashed the plane, but nothing concrete has ever been found. Some conspiracy theories say there was a terrorist on board who killed everyone and then flew the plane. Others say the plane was carrying something it wasn't supposed to be carrying, like weapons or drugs. Still, others say the plane was simply flying, and the pilots accidentally lost control of the aircraft. The truth is, we may never know what happened to MH370. All we know is that it took off on March 2014, and it crashed into the Indian Ocean sometime later. What do you think happened? Let us know your theory in the comments below.